Today we're talking about Animorphs number 7, The Stranger. Do excuse the new layout, by the way. I've been rearranging the house, probably moved down here, maybe rearranged the backdrop, whatever. Right, so number 7, The Stranger. We're back to our second Rachel book in the Animorphs series. We've just come out of Jake being yerked, and now we're on to Rachel getting up to her typical hijinks. Now, the story starts off badly. Straight out there. Not a fan of the first 3 chapters. For a number of reasons. First couple of chapters, personally, I think are badly written. As in, written badly. It's, one of the things I've learned is that you can't have sort of jumpy sentences in a non-thriller-esque bit. Probably explain that better. It's too monotonous. It's sentence, 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 sentence. There's no flow. And that was the first 2 chapters of this book. It was just constantly, we were at the circus, full stop. It was a sunny day, full stop. My name is Rachel, full stop. I am fucking American, full stop. It was doing that for like the first 2 chapters, and I thought, oh, this isn't right. Animorphs usually has... the flow goes quite well depending on the scene, but at the start of this one, it was just like, oh, what the fuck am I reading? Yeah, it wasn't very well written, sorry. The first couple of chapters, it did get better after that. It felt more like an Animorphs book, but the first 2 chapters here, they felt like they were written by a 5-year-old. The content of the first 2 chapters as well. At first, I was really frustrated at this because it was basically a rehashing of the book 3 shenanigans at the start, where Tobias and Rachel go to deal in Dan's car dealership, and Rachel proceeds to get into her elephant morph and terrorise the bad guy, who isn't really a bad guy, just... I mean, yeah, to a certain extent. They're not the bad guy as in, like, Vista 3 level bad guy, of course. But whatever. That's by the by. So, we have a scene where Cassie is just sort of following along with this little plan because Rachel saw elephants in the circus getting cattle prodded. Now, yeah, it's bad. Cattle prodding your animals in a circus environment is bad. But should Rachel and Cassie really do what they're doing? Should they really do that? Rachel, for a start, thought speaks to this circus guy. How do they know this guy isn't a yerk? For a start, how do they know that? He could turn around and say, hold on, you're an Andalite. Pulled out Draco and beam out of his, his fucking arse and just blammo. Dead Rachel. And why? Because she felt bad for these elephants. I mean, fair, but you've got to choose your battles. You've really got to choose your battles. Sometimes there is a battle and it's below you. That is such a thing. These kids are charged with saving the world. And they're going to, Rachel and Cassie specifically, are going to risk their lives to protect a bunch of circus elephants. Prioritization. That's not a battle you want to get involved in. One of the more annoying things, though, is when we come out of this scene and we have the confrontation with Jake. Now, this has happened a few times now where an Animorph has gone to do their own little thing. And Jake, if I was Jake at this point, I'd be pulling my fucking hair out. To be fair, he sort of does it himself as well. Bad leadership, setting a bad example. My big problem here is twofold. Firstly, he doesn't chastise Rachel. He sort of walks up to her, giving it all this bollocks, and then just says, "Oh, sort yourself out then." No, Jake. No. That's not what you do. As the leader, you are the focal point of the team. Sorry while I fix all this back up. I broke Mercy, by the way. I dropped her when I was rearranging. She lost her wing. Oh dear. Dead mercy. Right. Where was I? Oh yeah. Shut up, phone! Where the hell did that come from? Jake, as a leader, you're supposed to set an example. You're supposed to be almost like a counselor role to the team. You're supposed to lead them through their issues. Just saying, deal with it yourself, it's not quite right. So Jake loses points here. And he loses points elsewhere as well, which we'll get into. Now, at this point in the story, I'm thinking it's going to be about Rachel's impulsiveness. The first few chapters annoyed me because we've seen impulsive Rachel before, and the opening shenanigans just seem to be re-establishing that in a poorly written way that's been done before. So that's why it annoyed me. But as we moved along, there were little clues saying, hold on, maybe this book is directly addressing this impulsiveness in a way that will change Rachel going forward. And that's what initially, throughout like the first third to a half of this book, I thought it was about Rachel's impulsivity. But I think I was wrong. I'm not too sure. Right, back to the plot. Marco and Tobias have found a new Yurkpool entrance. And they don't want to go in, but they feel like they have to go in. Because they feel that if they go into the Yurkpool, they might find out some clues as to the Kandrona's whereabouts. What the effing heck? What is this all about? Going into the main headquarters of your enemy to gather clues as to one of their primary resources. It's a stupid plan. Why would you go into the headquarters of your enemy to find clues for something that in a way, but it's personally far too risky. They've already been in the Yurkpool once, and it turned out to be a bit of a disaster. And they don't want to go down there. I think that there probably should be other ways that they find this out. I mean, Christ, they've got Axe here. He's supposed to be the brainy one. He's supposed to come up with the ideas. But personally, stupid plan. Too risky. You don't even know if you're going to find clues to the Kandrona. You could be there for days and find nothing, and just constantly increasing the risk to your personal safety. Disastrous plan. But being the Animorphs, they carry on with it. I mentioned Rachel's impulsivity, thinking, oh, this is going to be the main target of the book. Here is where that idea went away. Because instead of being incredibly impulsive, when it came to her father, she became incredibly indecisive. Which is great and all. I understand the juxtaposition here, but by the end, the book has not addressed this issue. The book is raising the issue or the two issues of Rachel's impulsivity and Rachel's indecisiveness. And nothing ever, they just sort of bounce against each other, and then that's it. We'll get more to that at the end of the book, but at this stage, Rachel's dad comes up to her and says, I'm off to New York, I imagine, 1,000 miles away. Roughly, probably. I could be wrong. Rachel gets upset, which is understandable. Father moving away. She loves her father, but she's also torn with regard to the Animorphs because she has to save the world. She has to choose her battles. Much like the same way she didn't choose her battles in the first few chapters, but let's just forget they exist. Personally, from my point of view, my parents divorced. I'm looking at Rachel, I'm thinking, the answer is clear. It couldn't be a more obvious answer, and that is to stay home. But I'm not Rachel. I probably shouldn't be speaking for her. But this is impulsive Rachel. We've established this throughout the first 6 books, and we come to this, and suddenly there's a halt on her impulsivity, and she becomes incredibly indecisive. You'd think that this becomes relevant. It doesn't. Not really. Rachel gets so upset that she travels to go see Tobias. She goes flying in her eagle morph. Goes to see Tobias. Tobias is clearly like, is something wrong with you? And she's like, no, I'm fine. It's a very blokish thing to do. Just to say, yeah, I'm fine. Girls, from my own experience, girls tend to be more open with these sorts of things. But Rachel is, she's very hard-shelled. Rachel promises to take out a Hawk-Bajir for Tobias, which does eventually happen. That's another show of, they still see this as almost sort of a game, because the Hawk-Bajir are just, again, these monsters, sort of like you get in an arcade machine. Oh, I'll take one of them out for you, you know. But that's a minor point. They go ahead. Oh, no, missing a part there. Rachel goes to the gardens and proceeds to acquire a grizzly morph. Does she take many precautions in doing this? Of course, she doesn't need a key, because, you know, key gate. I suppose she can just fly in there. She goes up to this grizzly, who just happens to leave her alone, and she acquires it, because, and then she flies away, and they proceed with their mission. Now, Rachel. This is, again, her impulsiveness, just going out and getting a grizzly morph. She could have been killed. This girl has no sort of restraint on her when it comes to entering a dangerous situation, which is her character, to be fair, and I can't fault her for following her character. But this is partly Jake's fault. Now, before you say, well, how is it Jake's fault he wasn't there? As a leader, you set an example. What happened at the start of the last book? Jake goes and acquires a cockroach morph without anybody there, and morphs it to test it. Now, granted, a cockroach is much different from a grizzly, but the example has been set by the leader. He can go and acquire any morph if he feels like it could be useful. So Rachel goes and does it. So this isn't a failing, partly a failing on Rachel because she did something demonstrably stupid, but it's more of a failing on Jake for failing to set the right example. Jake is not doing well in this book. You might have already noticed. So the animals proceed to go down to the Yerk pool where they get gobbled up by Taxon whilst in cockroach morph, and suddenly time freezes and we get introduced to the Elemist. Now, the Elemist is a top-notch bloke, very powerful, immediately comes off as somewhat manipulative. And the Animorphs find this out very quickly as well. But he tells them that the human race is doomed to extinction. But at the same time, he brings them out of their building they're in and into the middle of the Yerk pool where they get a good view of the area around them. Similar thing happens earlier where he sort of manipulates them to see the world around them, to see where things fall into place. And the Animorphs, to much to their credit, are clever enough to spot things that are going to be useful to them. Good tactical sense. Good strategic sense. Good stuff. But we immediately, in this book, get to know this godlike creature that calls himself the Elemist, plural, because he seems to imply that there are other Elemists. We get to know this godly figure, and he's immediately very manipulative. You know, he wants to place things here and there, says, oh, I don't interfere. I don't interfere. You think I interfere? Ha! Yes, indirectly. He offers them a way out of the fight, to take their family members to go off somewhere else. And this obviously puts the Animorphs in a strange position, because they think, on the one hand, we could go to this place and be happy, but we will leave behind an entire planet that the Elemist has conveniently just showed us some of the parts that he finds more appealing. These images. And this is a good test of character for the Animorphs. A very good test of character. And of course, because it's a question of morality, Cassie is the one that makes the wrong choice and they vote against her. What is this Cassie character? She's the only one who's like, yeah, I love the planet and all, and the whole point of me doing this is because I don't want to see fucking, I don't know, climate change and shit. But at the opportunity of me going and being happy and screwing off the planet, I'm all good. What is this character? It's just, this isn't Cassie. Go away, Cassie. Annoying me. Right, so, unfreezes time. They've got to make their decision soon. They now know to go up the drop shaft. So they run out and they get into a battle with a bunch of Hawk-Bajir and Taxons. And Rachel morphs her Grizzly for the first time. And while she thinks she's attacking Hawk-Bajir, turns out she's attacking Jake in his Tiger Morph, and she finds herself chasing him up the drop shaft. Another example of Rachel's impulsivity coming into play. Does this play a part in the story? No. No, it doesn't. In fact, it's quite the opposite. But you might already be getting the impression that this book is going to be a bit lower on the score level than the other ones. So they escape. Jake chastises her for morphing Grizzly, even though he did it himself. And then there's a whole bit about them having to come to a decision. The Elmist appears to them again, shows them an image of their future where Rachel is a controller. She obviously doesn't like that. She attacks Visa 3. He shows them the EGS tower. Shows them that all the other hosts around the Earth pool have all given up hope, as it were. But in the midst of all this, he has shown them the clue that they need to find the Kandrona. And you know the funny thing? The scene where Rachel has her Eureka moment comes in a classroom with Miss Paloma, who they thought they saw deceased over a desk earlier. Not sure what the metaphor is there, if there is one at all, but there is something there, maybe. And the Elmist says that he doesn't interfere with sentient races. He was perfectly fine interfering with Miss Paloma, Paloma, to control her and to say things at Rachel. Granted, it's a small interference in a sentient being's life, but he controlled her. The Elmist has said that he does not interfere. He doesn't interfere with the Animorphs, maybe, but he obviously interfered with this NPC in the background. Poor writing. It's just an example of poor writing there. The Elmist is supposed to be someone who doesn't interfere, yet when it comes to characters that aren't part of the main core, he just interferes willy-nilly. Yeah, it's inconsistent. But either way, that's only a small little bit. Rachel and Cassie figure it out, so the Animorphs decide to go into the EGS tower at, I think they said 10 past 5 in the morning. That's relevant. They go up the EGS tower, and they have a battle with a bunch of Hawk-Bajir. It's like 8 Hawk-Bajir against the initially 5 of them. Tobias comes in like right at the end. They get into a brawl, and it's the first time we get a full-on Animorphs versus group of Hawk-Bajir brawl. We've had like little mini ones up to this point, but this is the first time there's like a bang. All of them come in together, and it's all a bit of a scrap. Rachel fulfills her promise to Tobias to take out Hawk-Bajir, knocking one out of the window and plummeting 60 floors to the ground. Now remember, it was 10 past 5 when they first arrived at the EGS tower. They're in a city. I've been in cities. I know that cities never really stop. There's always somebody milling around. So it was 10 past 5 when they got there. Probably about half an hour later. So you're looking at like 20 to 6 in the morning when people are starting to go to work. When the garbage men, as you call them in America, are out doing their thing. And suddenly this Hawk-Bajir just splatters on the ground. Followed shortly after by a massive glowing capsule, like landing on top of it. No one's going to twig onto that and think, huh, that's an alien. Unless it's, I don't know, maybe it splattered so thoroughly that nobody could tell. But they got different coloured blood, so somebody look, that's weird. That guy's on some serious fucking drugs. I don't know. Poor sod of a Hawk-Bajir gets knocked out the window. All jokes aside about the Hawk-Bajir bit, it's one of those subtle moments that will probably stick with Rachel. And as further we go into the series, I think what happens is all these little moments add up to the point where they're just broken in here. That's what happens in war. You see tragic things happening. I've never been into a war. I've been in the military. I've spoken to a lot of people who have been in war, and it's just small things. Small things in a war zone can be devastating. And for Rachel, a 13-year-old girl, pushes, granted, she thinks at the time is just this monster alien, out of a window. Even here, she says that she remembers that in her head and she shudders. That's not insignificant. That's a memory now in her head. That she's pushed this, thinking, sentient creature to its death. That probably will stick with Rachel. It's one of those things that we read once, but the characters will never stop reading. But that's a more tragic part of that's the tragedy of Animorphs. Because even though they don't really know these Hork-Bajir so far, they've had their clues and they've seen the Hork-Bajir in cages. They know that they're not evil creatures. They're not. Even the Animorphs have not known them know this at this point. So we finish the story with them destroying the Kandrona, and you know what? First victory. First actual genuine Animorphs victory. They've destroyed the Kandrona. What are the moral implications here? What would you say to destroying food supplies? It's hard to say when you're doing it indiscriminately. Does it count as a war crime? Really? Probably not, because they are an invasive force, and so the Animorphs wouldn't think that they were civilian Yeerks if such something existed in this bunch, so they're attacking the resources of the military. But it still raises that question of, is this really ethically sound? The Animorphs don't raise any objections. You'd have thought Cassie, being the ethically stable one, you'd have thought that she might raise an objection. We've just destroyed their food supply. Loads of them are going to die. But we're still in the old black and white, Yeerks, pure evil stage. And this is just a solid victory. And it is a victory. It is a victory. Definitely. But let's get to the conclusions of these stories. What was this story about, really? Do you know what? I don't know. In the end, Rachel decides not to go with her father. But the whole idea of her father leaving and would she follow him or not was rested on Rachel's decision. That ran parallel to the Elmer story where the Elmer says you can come live over here where you're safe, or you could live fighting your little war. And if it's all about Rachel's decision, then why did the Ellimist make the decision for her and the other Animorphs? So we start this story with Rachel being impulsive. Then we have the whole saga of her being completely indecisive. And by the end, somebody else makes the decision for her. What sort of story is that? That's just messed up. It's like they've had several ideas, thrown them together and just said, oh, as long as we make the action bits fine, it should all be good. I'm sorry, but it's not good. There's no... I still don't know what this story's about. I've been thinking about it for days, and the underlying parts of this story just confuses me. Rachel is acting both spontaneous and indecisively, with no sort of reason or rhyme behind it, and then in the end, somebody else sorts her problem for her. Goppin story. And this is coming down from the Predator and the Capture. Let's compare it to the Capture for a second here. What did I say was great about the Capture? You had the underlying base of the Capture, the subtle bit, the bit that you don't necessarily read, but you read. And that was solid. The fluffy stuff on top, there were little issues here and there, it wasn't that great, but the underlying stuff in there was fantastic. This story is the opposite. The fluffy stuff on top, the icing on the cake, is beautifully made. But apart from the first few chapters, there's a fucking turd lodged into the otherwise beautiful icing on this cake. But the spongy centre, has gone off. And you know, you get 2 layers. One is like chocolate flavour and the other is like, I don't know, spinach flavour. And it just doesn't fit together. That's this book. As opposed to The Catcher, which, you know, is really quite plain, a bit badly drawn icing, but the spongy centre, oh, it's gorgeous. Gorgeous. And the spongy centre matters more in the end than the icing and how it's decorated. This one, the opposite. Jake as a leader, poor. Poor, poor, poor. Does not chastise properly, does not lead, comes up, doesn't even have any pushback on the stupid idea of going down to the Yerk pool. Setting the bad example. Granted, that was in the last book, but this is where it comes to fruition. And he still does not say anything. You say to Rachel, look, come here. You are not to do that. You are all not to do that. Because else, to be fair, they are the only team he's got. He can't exactly give out disciplinaries. I mean, he could probably come up with a system, but it's just no leadership. It's just like, oh, I'm angry at you. Don't do it again. And it's just bad. It's bad, bad, bad. Jake gets a 4 out of this one. He didn't do anything drastically wrong. It's the subtle stuff he's gotten wrong. 4 out of 10 for Jake. As for the story, for all my criticism, it did keep me reading. It kept me entertained. I read it back to front, quite snappish. But first 3 chapters, the confused and baffling message and storyline behind it. It was good to get the Alarmist. Interesting character, everybody's favourite plot convenience. And it was the battle scenes were good, really good. And there were some little bits in there that were really quite well written, just not the first 3 chapters. This book gets, I keep wavering between 6 and 7. It is, I'm going to give it a 6. Because I've compared it to The Encounter, and I think The Encounter at least has almost a consistent subplot, well, not sub, a storyline beneath the storyline. This one doesn't. This one, the message is fucked. It seems to be trying to find a way to play into Rachel's impulsivity, but also to give her a challenging question, which in the end doesn't really mean anything. Her dad's moving away. Okay. What does that do for us Animorphs? And then they also wanted to just throw in the Alarmist in there. Excuse me. And it all just became a bit of a mess. Yeah, it reads well, mostly. And the battles are good. But it's a mess. And that's why it's a 6 out of 10. The worst one so far, I'm sorry to say. Next one, though, we're not going to number 8. Ha ha ha. We're going to Megamorphs, the Andalite's Gift. In the meantime, though, look what I got. Chris Grine, legend. Animorphs graphic novel. Now, first thoughts, I'm very impressed. But this is for a review on it of its own. So, at some point, I'll be getting a review of this. I'm already like a third of the way through. I've got my Lestrange bookmark. So that's going to come up. I hope you enjoy the new layout. It hasn't got as much animal stuff in the background, but whatever. Thank you very much for watching, and I shall see you all soon for the Andalite's Gift review. See you there. If you have any comments about The Stranger, if you think I'm wrong about something, tell me in the comments below. If you think you know the message of this book and that I've missed something or I've gone wrong somewhere, tell me in the comments below. Subscribe, like this video, go check out my fan fiction, go check out the Animorphs Discord, and just have a ruddy good evening. Goodbye, everyone. See you later.